In 2005, a book was published that would take the world by storm. I really don't feel the need to give you much background because I feel like if you were alive during this time, you know what I'm talking about. Honestly, the whole culture surrounding Twilight was so big that even if you didn't experience the series firsthand, you got most of the details through cultural osmosis. The book series sold over 100 million copies. It won tons of awards. At one time, all 4 books were on the top 4 slots of the best-selling books list. And if I'm interpreting the movie data correctly, the franchise has brought in over $3.3 billion in the box office. Billion with a B. At this point, by all but the most literary critics, I feel like you could argue that this series is a modern-day classic. It's a cultural icon whose impact can still be felt today in a lot of ways, both positive and negative. And I feel like anyone that didn't agree with that now has to, because with the announcement of Midnight Sun getting released this year, all of book Twitter and book internet in general freaked out about this retelling of the story of Twilight from the perspective of the male love interest Edward Cullen. It's well known at this point that the original target demographic for the series was like teenage ladies. But when seemingly unexpectedly, women from the entire spectrum of age ranges latched onto the franchise, it really just blew it into a completely different stratosphere. As is the case with anything that becomes popular though, having such a massive spotlight on this franchise brought a lot of public backlash and scrutiny. And honestly, the truth of the matter is that even though Twilight and the subsequent releases in the series were a massive cultural and financial success, they were extremely easy to pick apart. Like, I'm talking super easy. Everything from Meyer and her philosophy, her writing style, the characters, the themes, the way she portrays vampires and werewolves. I could freaking go on. Every single thing in this book is extremely easy to criticize. Pretty much, Twilight is the universal lowest hanging comedy fruit there is, maybe just above, like, potty humor. But even still, there is so much insanity packed into these books and the adaptations of the books that it's almost impossible not to laugh at it. It's that bad. And while during the height of Twilight's relevance, so a lot of this stuff was happening. It could be seen on late night comedy, YouTube sketch comedy, everywhere. From what I've seen in the time since it's released, continually criticized for its themes and messages and their problematic nature. This includes a lot of criticism from people who grew up fans of the series. So you have this massively popular thing that everyone knows about. It's the butt of every joke for a hot 5 years. Maybe more. And then as time has gone on, everyone just talks about how unhealthy the story and its themes are, how terrible it was. People that grew up liking the series trying to reread it and realizing that even if they still like it, there's a lot of messed up things in the books. And then every once in a while, you still throw out a Twilight joke now and then. Here's where I come in. I've never watched the movie Twilight. I've never read the books. I've taken part in significant amounts of Twilight bashing. A lot of it can be found somewhere on YouTube if you look hard enough. In high school, my cousins and I did like a sketch comedy show where every year when we got together for the family reunions, we would make silly videos and put them on the internet. There's a skit that I wrote somewhere on the internet right now where there's a bit where I made up a fake MMO called World of Twilight, which was a spoof on World of Warcraft, and the majority of the joke was built around the fact that you could pick the race of your player character to either be a vampire, a werewolf, or a human, and then the human was basically useless and was helplessly in love with the other races and couldn't do anything for themselves. It was a whole thing. The point is, I never experienced Twilight firsthand, but I still knew enough about it to tell you the majority of its plot, the main characters. I could tell you the problematic elements. I could tell you the defenses against those problematic elements. I could tell you different criticisms and the defenses that people who liked the series used as defenses against those criticisms. It was so big during my formative years that I can do all of these things having never actually experienced any of it firsthand. And that's why I broke my rule. Normally, I don't like to make fun of things that I haven't experienced for myself, or at least tried to experience for myself. But Twilight was so universal that I felt like I could talk about it, even though I've never actually tried to do it or whatever. It was just so easy. Semi-recently, I tried listening to the audiobook for Twilight, and I DNF'd it in like less than 2 chapters. Bella's incessant whininess and just looking at the world through the worst possible lens, it was unbearable for me. At the time, I had a podcast and I made fun of that. At least that time I tried, I guess. Just the angst and the prose were too much to even do for a joke or for a bit, and I decided I was done. It was not worth it, not even for the funny jokes. And honestly, the people that still like Twilight probably deserved to like that in peace. We've had enough laughs at their expense, I guess. I don't know. It's still funny to make fun of Twilight. But obviously I'm making this video, so something changed. If I'm being honest, the cover was a huge part of it. I'd see the Twilight cover in thrift stores or book sales or at the library, and I've always loved the covers for these books. They're just so like iconic, and the simplicity with the color choices and the red that stands out always got to me. I've always loved those covers. I'd always try to convince myself, well, maybe it's not that bad. And if I'm being completely honest, this was such a big part of the world that I existed in growing up that I have always been just still curious to figure out what it was that people really liked about the series, connected with it. I was always still curious, even after this, but then I'd remember that I listened to that audiobook and it was awful. It was unbearably awful, and then I'd stop. Then I went to a library book sale, and they had, I don't know, 12 copies of Twilight. It was less than $1 for me to pick up that first Twilight book. At that point, I'd been on BookTube for a few months. I knew that people who grew up in the book internet community were mostly Twilight fans. I thought maybe if at some point I wanted to read it, that was a great price to jump in. I thought maybe I could bring my 15-year Twilight curiosity full circle. I didn't know when. I didn't have any plans at that point. I did kind of think that it was an irrelevant thing. Even though I was curious about it, I knew that people still loved the series. I didn't think hey, somebody reads Twilight for the first time would still be interesting to anyone. But I was actually genuinely surprised when I did that YA romance poll in the video that I did at the beginning of this whole quarantine thing. When Twilight had the second most votes for the book I should read. I even used caveats in that video of I didn't think I was going to like it. I thought it was just going to be a rant review. Like I warned people, and maybe that's what people wanted to see. Maybe people wanted to see me read Twilight and then rant about it. Maybe everybody loves a good rant review, even if it's something that's been completely bashed on before, well-worn territory. Everybody loves to see that sometimes. Maybe you thought I would give it a fair shake. I have no idea. Maybe you wanted me to like it, or you thought that I might like it. You didn't know my history with it, but the interest was there. Some of you people, Leslie, Deanie, you wanted to know what I was going to think about the series. Thank you guys for encouraging me to do that, and here we are now. I hope this is what you wanted, I don't know. But then it happened. Stephenie Meyer announced the release of Midnight Sun in August, and I knew this was my shot. It was now or never. Poop or get off the pot. The thing was, I wanted to find an angle that wasn't just me hate reading it and then doing a rant review. I didn't want to lie either and say that I don't like the idea of just reading a book and saying that I enjoy it and then talking positively about it to try to get people online to be my friend. I couldn't do that. I didn't want to just be a hater for hater's sake. I didn't want to be drinking the haterade, but I always knew that was a possibility. I warned people that was a possibility. But I wanted to give Twilight the fairest shot I could. I wanted to give it the best chance it could have in my brain for potentially enjoying this 15-year-old teenage lady-centric romance fantasy about vampires. And since I wasn't the target demographic, my primary approach before I started reading was to try to figure out who the target demographic actually was, try to figure out something about them. And then once I figured that out, I wanted to figure out why it appealed to the target demographic so strongly. I wanted to figure out how the people who loved the thing could push through the absolutely abominable prose. I wanted to figure out how in the world Meyer was able to get this book published, and that sounds mean, but bear with me, please bear with me. The answers that I found to these conundrums not only unlocked the book for me, but they also taught me a little bit about myself as well. So I guess at this point, I'm just going to jump into it. That whole thing was kind of just a stupid long intro, I guess. Boom. Let's start with some obvious things. Romance books seem to skew heavily towards fantasy, not the swords and magic kind, the wish fulfillment kind. Readers of romance seem to like to have that sort of wish fulfillment angle met. And honestly, I don't need to specify romances there. It happens with a lot of genres. Quest fantasies, books that I normally like, have a young farm boy, normal kid who somehow becomes powerful enough to defeat the Dark Lord. Superhero story. My freaking favorite superhero is Spider-Man. He's the nerdy kid in school who's a geek, who turns into a superhero and falls in love with a super attractive woman. These are all wish fulfillment things. It makes sense. There seems to be a plethora of young ladies who like to think about falling in love with a super attractive guy who is obsessed with them, in the same way that sometimes young dudes think that they can grow up and change the world instead of just punching numbers in a cubicle until they're 65. I don't know. I realize I'm generalizing here, but we have to stick with me. Basic understanding and the generosity of applying that knowledge to this subject was the first of two keys that I think are necessary for you to free your mind about Twilight. That seems like it should be obvious to most people. I think maybe it is. I don't know. It's really easy to just not think about it. If it doesn't match your interests, it's easy to just kind of say it's stupid and neglect to understand why it may be interesting to other people. So I'm a little embarrassed about that. The second key, I'm also embarrassed to admit, not for the reasons that you might think, but because they point out a glaring, ridiculous, huge double standard that I've had for my entire life, or at least the parts of my life in which I thought Twilight was stupid. 2005 was a year when pop punk was still pretty in, and these were the years when the emo elements started to invade pop punk. I'm sorry that this is going to turn into a music discussion, but it has to. It's super relevant. Bear with me. Maybe you can laugh at me. Maybe you can feel me. I don't know. We're talking the years of Blink-182, Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, Paramore, Reliant K, Simple Plan, The All-American Rejects, Sum 41, freaking Avril Lavigne before she was murdered and replaced by a body double. First, yes, I'm a grown-up pop punk boy. Second, I gotta get on a hobby horse real quick. Just 1 sec. The word emo is just short for emotional. It's not a synonym for the word goth. It doesn't mean the same thing as screamo. A lot of people say emo, screamo. And screamo, incidentally, is not a word that actually applies to all forms of unclean vocals, which is like the credited in your liner notes version way of talking about the people that scream or growl vocals. Emo is really just a term for emotionally driven music, sometimes called confessional. And during that time period, some of the time before, some of the time after, it's become associated correctly and incorrectly with certain genres of music. If you're wondering, one of my current favorite genres of music right now is called Midwest emo. It's freaking emo is crap. And it's a word that I still use in my everyday vocabulary to describe things that are just maybe over the top emotional. I use it for a lot of different songs instead of just genres of music. We're talking about things that are embarrassingly confessional, sometimes considered whiny or complainy or overly cynical. You know what I'm talking about, especially as I continue here. Ironically, things like pop punk music and goth music and styles can fit under that umbrella, but they aren't exclusive to those things. Nevertheless, I digress. Back to the point, I'm a pop punk boy. When I grew up, I didn't want to waste my time, become another casualty of society. I felt like I was an all-American reject. When I couldn't get my way, I time bombed. I wasn't okay. I wanted to be a skater boy. I was a kid and life was a nightmare. I could do this way too long, but I feel like you get the point. But it goes deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. Not only was that the crap I listened to when I was a teenager, like I said, I still listen to Midwest emo today, and I'm talking about the double standard here. That's why I gotta emphasize this point. I freaking still listened to emo whiny bullcrap. Here are some freaking cynically, beautifully whiny lyrics from some recent albums that I love.
First of all, I am sorry. Disappointment, enthusiast. I think I am permanently sick. I just threw up at the thought of being honest. I think it's about time that I warned you I might cry in front of you. And I don't want you to feel like I'm afraid of the truth. I didn't want you to feel like it was all your fault. But that doesn't mean that I wanted you to feel nothing at all. You claim you're DIY, but you don't want to die. Every time you see the word millennial, oh, we're entitled, but I'm sleeping on tile. And eating cold raviolis at the show.
And here is maybe like the most all-encompassing, most quoted thing. Ask my wife. First of all, she hates this artist. Second of all, I quote this song and this album way too much. But this one line embodies everything that I'm trying to say about the genre and my double standard and something that you might want to be in the mindset of when you approach Twilight. Hit it.
Nothing's ever good enough. Nothing's ever good enough.
And dude, when I thought about it in that way, it just clicked for me. Bella is thick as frick and emo is crap. Suddenly I found myself in a mental time machine to my hormonal, illogical, emotionally developing, whiny teenage self, and I found all of the pieces falling into place. To the people that love Twilight and they know what I'm talking about, this is probably like the most duh thing ever that I could be talking about, but it was revelatory for me. And I feel like that might be useful information to other people that may be in my shoes, been in my shoes. I feel like there's just a lot of people that don't get it, even though it's probably obvious to some of you. Bella isn't smart. Bella isn't logical. Bella isn't a role model. Bella isn't looking for emotional stability. Bella is a pop punk protagonist. But more importantly, Bella is raw and Bella is real, at least for that crowd. On BookTube and at large, we talk about how representation is important, and that's not ever what we think about. Bella is the stand-in character for the hormone-raging suburban kid who isn't really struggling with that much for real, but wants to fight for some semblance of individual identity in a system that feels crushing in its mundanity. Mundaneness? Whatever that word is. Bella makes the kid screaming, "Mom and Dad possess the key, instant slavery," feel heard. The people whose lives are quite safe and sane, but they wish for some sort of edginess, but not enough that it makes them actually uncomfortable. The kids who think they know better than their parents and they want to fall hopelessly in love with a demigod who is maybe creepily obsessed with them. They want to feel the adrenaline rush that accompanies first love. It's stupid, it's illogical, it's raw, but it's accurate. And it's kind of why when articles like this one, it's like a new article. It came out with the announcement of Midnight Sun. It's why when these come out, the actual target demo for these books just say, "Okay, boomer," and then dive deeper into their fandom for the thing. Teenagers don't always act logically, and they don't want to act like mature, sensible people. Or maybe they are mature, and they're well-adjusted teenagers, but they want some kind of escape that allows them to live vicariously through someone a little more rash and who isn't making as smart choices as them. They want to experience that secondhand. Older intellectuals or ex-fans of the series may be forgetting the significance of being able to identify with those feelings, that mindset, and I feel like it's one of those things when people are constantly talking about the problematic or unhealthy bits in the teen media that exist and become popular. It reminds me of any time something new happens and adults act like the sky's falling. And don't get me wrong, I think people should feel free to analyze these things. I feel like you should be able to criticize anything you want to in the ways that you want to. I feel like you should be able to make fun of Twilight however much you want to. You can love it if you want to. I'm trying to present a mindset that I feel like is probably accurate. But I feel like most times when you have a target demographic for something just specifically honed in on, the elements that make them relatable and desirable to the people in that target demographic are the things that turn off everyone outside of that target demographic and just attack it for not being what they want. I think that's like a truism. Isn't that a lot of the stuff that goes on with like the criticism of YA literature? It seems like it to me. There's one more important point, building off of those two fundamental understandings, that I think we should discuss before moving into the actual meat of Twilight. The book is written from the perspective of Bella. It's first-person perspective. Let's think about the implications that go along with that. First of all, it explains the prose. It explains why it is the way it is. It explains the insanity, the angstiness, the cynical, ridiculous nature that every single plot event is seen through, the lens that we see it through. And just as importantly, it kind of lets us know that Isabella Swan is a little bit of an unreliable narrator when it comes to telling us her own story. Especially as an adult reading Twilight, it's clear that the events that happen to Bella in the story aren't really always the way that she describes them happening. And that's kind of awesome and smart. The way she perceives and reacts to circumstances as seen as a third-party observer, even through her own eyes, we can see that she's just kind of wrong about a lot of things. And we can see it, especially as an adult. I don't know if that's something that you can always see as a teen. The people that I see that talk about how stupid Bella is, I think they're right, but I think that they may not be realizing that, like, she is unreliable. She's completely misconstruing and perceiving what's happening incorrectly, and I'll elaborate on that in a further video. And I don't know if this is something that you can always notice like on your first read through, but because I know so much about the story from that cultural osmosis that I talked about earlier, the foreshadowing in this book is freaking thick with 2 C's. The first entry in this series is just Bella foreshadowing the crap out of everything that's going to happen and is about to happen. Okay, now I feel like that's a good summary of what I think is necessary for you to understand Twilight going into it and to understand my interpretation of the book. But I realize I haven't actually really talked about the book at all. I've been talking a long time. This is like 45 minutes of record time. It's going to be embarrassing when I tell you that, and then we cut the video down and it's way less and you realize how much I had to cut out because I'm an idiot. But in my next video, I'm going to be using these principles and this mindset to analyze the actual story of Twilight. I'm going to give you my honest reactions and feelings about it, understanding these things about myself and about this whole thing. And at some point, I am going to try to watch the movie with Amanda and kind of give my thoughts on the adaptation and how well that is handled. If you guys like this, if this was interesting to you, please let me know. I know it's very different than the things that I normally talk about. It may be a different way of approaching the subject. I don't know. But if this is something that you guys like and you enjoy what I do with these Twilight themed videos, I might try to do that with the rest of the series. I'm also trying to use this formatting and the way that I'm making this video to like be a little bit of a practice run for the way that I handle some of the stuff moving into Stormlight 2020. By the way, if you subscribed to my channel because you wanted to see Stormlight stuff and this happened, I'm sorry, it was just bad timing. I kind of had it in the plans and then Midnight Sun dropped, and thank you if you stuck around, I guess. If this is the first video that you're seeing from me and you want to see this stuff, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell to hear about as I continue through this series. If this is something you want me to continue with, please let me know. I've been really nervous to do this. Maybe I'm overreacting. I might just be overreacting. It's just, I've been nervous to talk about this. I know it's a touchy subject for a lot of people. I also never expected to be really doing this, doing a Twilight deep dive as an old man in 2020. Enough about that. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm freaking sweaty right now. I'm nervous and it's hot. I hope you guys are looking forward to me actually diving into the book itself. And I hope to see you again soon, Twilight video or not. Until next time, I'm not your dad, but I am your best friend. Bye.
Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.